Hello and welcome to the CSS Animation Full Course in Prog Bytes. My name is Tavish, and in today's video, I'm going to show you all possible ways to animate your elements in CSS. I have divided this video in 3 sections. In the first section, I will show you how you can animate your elements using CSS transition property. In the second part, you will learn how to make more complex animations using CSS animation property and keyframes. And in the last part, I'm going to animate a real page for you using both transition and animation properties, so it will help you solidify everything you get through the course. So let's get started. Now let's review our materials. In the first 2 sections, we will keep playing with this little guy. We will see how we can animate this item by all possible ways. So we will learn and practice using this item. Then as a conclusion, I will animate this page, which is a little real-world example, and we will turn it from an absolute static page to a nice modern animated page. As you can see, it doesn't react to any of the events that are happening right now, but I will show you how to change it to this. You can see this page reloads with a nice animation, and it brings this content smoothly from 2 sides. Every time it gets loaded, this animation occurs. Also, when you hover this information, they slide smoothly to the right, and it happens for each of them independently. You can see it is very nice. And also these buttons, when you hover them, they nicely slide to the bottom, and when you remove the hover, they come back nicely. And look at this image. It has an animation which is happening every 4 seconds. And it is an infinite animation that will never stop. You can see it has a very nice animation. Alright, let's see how simple it becomes after learning CSS transition and CSS animation properties. But before we start, I want to mention that in the case that you found this video helpful, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you are interested in web development, then make sure to hit the subscribe button. Alright, as I said in the intro, there are 2 ways to animate an item with CSS. The first way is to use transition property, and the second way is to use animation property. Transition property is used for creating simpler animations, while animation property is used to create more complex animations. As you can see, I have a red element with a black container, so you can see both of them here. This is the test item, which is this red element, and this is test container, which is this black element. Alright, so now let's try transition property, and actually let's animate this item using transition property. So here you can see that this is my test container and this is my test item. So now let's actually, before we implement transitions, let's add a hover effect on this element or on this container. So when we hover this element, we want to move this item, for example. So let's select our test container. I want to add a hover effect on this container. So whenever we move our mouse over this container, we want to move this item to somewhere else. So let's add a hover effect. When it gets hovered, I want to select the test item, and simply we want to move it. So we can use transform, translate X, and let's, for example, move it 100 pixels to the right. So let's save it now. So you can see that now when I hover this container, it moves my item to the right, but it happens very fast and immediately. So you can see that it just disappears from one side and appears to another. Well, so this is the default behavior of transform and translate X. Whenever we translate our item somewhere, so it moves very fast. Now transition property allows us to do the same thing, but not immediately. And instead we want to do this, for example, in a period of time, in a duration of time. So for example, let's say that we want to move this item from here to here in 2 seconds. So this is what transition does for us. Now, how can we implement transitions? on our test item. So first I will list all of the properties that we can use to control or to implement transition, and then I will explain each of them and we will see it live in here. So the first property that comes with transition implementation, it is transition property. First we have transition property, then we have transition duration, next we have transition timing function, and in the last we have transition delay. Alright, so what is the job of this transition property? Actually, by using this transition property, we can list the names of the properties that we want to apply transition on them. For example, in our case, we are only using transform, so I can simply write here transform, which means that I am binding this transform property with this transition. Simply, we say here that we want to apply transition on transform property. We can, if we have more properties that we want to apply transition on, for example, if we don't want to only move this item, but we want to, for example, change its background color in the meantime, we can simply list all of the properties that we want to apply transition on them right here. For example, let's say that we want to change its background color too, so I can write background color. Now I am binding two properties with this transition, which means that whenever I hover this element, it is just an example, so it will change its background color. So we should actually use this background color. So let's, for example, say that we want to change its background color to blue. So this is how transition property should be. So we can list all of the properties that we want to use and we want to apply transition on them. And the next option is to use, if we don't want to list all of our properties, if we have more than one, so I can write all, and this will apply this transition on all of the possible properties that we can use for an element. So I recommend you to not use all here. You can simply write down the elements, the properties that you want to apply transition on, because using all means that we are binding all of the properties that are present in CSS. We are binding all of them with this transition, so it makes our CSS a little bit heavy, so it is not recommended to use all. So just name the properties that you want to apply transition. Well, the next property is transition duration, as its name conveys. So this is the duration of our transition. We should specify the duration. So how long do we want our transition to take? So for example, we can say here 2 seconds, 4 seconds, 10 seconds, any duration that we want. So 2s means 2 seconds. If we want to use milliseconds, so we can use milliseconds too. For example, 2000 milliseconds. Now it means that 2 seconds. So I like to use seconds, but you can do milliseconds too. So these first two properties, the transition property and transition duration, these are required properties, which means that we should set these properties. Otherwise, our transition won't work. And these two last properties, these are optional, which means that if I save my code now, right now we should have our transition. So if I move my item, so I think we have a problem. Oops, here I'm writing millisecond, 2 milliseconds, so therefore it didn't work. So now let's hover our element. Alright, you can see that now we have a very smooth and nice transition, or simply animation, on this item. And you can see that now it moves my item 100 pixels to the right, and also it changed its background color to blue. Alright, so now let's clear this background color. Now let's save it. So you can see that now it only moves my item to the right. And now that we have deleted this background color, we don't need to have it here. So I can simply remove it from here too. Alright. Now let's talk about this transition timing function. What is this transition timing function? By using this transition timing function, we can define different speeds for different parts of our animation according to its timing. For example, maybe we want our animation to start faster, then get slower in the last. So let's actually increase this time, and also let's translate it to 400 pixels or something like 480 pixels, and let's make it 7 seconds. For example, if I hover, you can see that it starts and goes to the right with the same speed. I can change this speed in different parts of this animation using this transition timing function. For example, we have a bunch of predefined values that we can write here. For example, the default is ease. So we have ease in. In ease in, our animation starts faster, then it goes slower, or I said vice versa. So it starts slower, then it goes faster. We have ease out, and this time let's actually make it faster. So maybe 4 seconds. So now if I hover, it starts faster, then it gets slower as it goes. Next we have ease in out, which is a kind of combination of this ease in and ease out, which means that it starts slower, then in the middle it gets faster, and in the last, once again, it gets slower. So this is ease out, ease in out. Then we have linear. So let's see this linear. You can see that it started very fast, then as it reached right here, it got slower. So this is linear. Now, how can we define our own timing functions? So say that we didn't like any of these predefined values. So how can we define our own timing function? Beside all of these predefined values that we can give, actually we can use a function here, which is cubic bezier, and we can use this function to set our own timing function. So now how this function works actually. First of all, there is a trick that I want to show you, that you can set your own cubic bezier function or your own transition timing function. First, select this cubic bezier and just select randomly whatever you want from this suggestion. You need to have 4 values inside this function. No matter what are these values, just make sure to have this cubic bezier function in your code, no matter what are the values. Then save this. Now I can go to the element that has this cubic bezier function, which is this red element now. So right now you can see that our cubic bezier values that we selected from the suggestion, it looks like this. You can see that it moves and it has a kind of bouncing too. So now right click on the element that has this cubic bezier, go to your inspect, and then open up your developers tool. So your window might look a little different, but no matter, just go to the elements tab, and here in the styles portion you can see here I have my cubic bezier function, and these are the values that we selected from the suggestion, no matter. But right here you can see that we have a kind of a little icon here that I can click, and it opens up this window for me. Now I have 2 things here that I can control. I can move them, and it generates the cubic bezier codes for me, and then I can preview the movement here with this ball icon. So for example, if I bring this here, you can see that my animation will be like that. So if I, all right, maybe I like this. So now what you can do is you can just copy this value from here, this cubic bezier function. I copied it, then close it, and I can simply paste it right here instead of this cubic bezier that we had before. So now if I save this, you can see that now I have my own cubic bezier. So it's happening very slow, but no matter. Now you know how to have your own timing function. And also there are a bunch of websites that generate this cubic bezier function code for you. Alright, next let's talk about this transition delay. As its name conveys, so it adds some delays for our transition. For example, if I add 1 second of delay. So now if I hover this black container, first it waits 1 second and then it starts the animation. You can see that now it works. So if I hover, it waits 1 second. And actually I don't like this transition delay, but no matter. Now you can see that we are using 4 properties in order to control our transition. But actually what we can do is we can simplify it. We can use a shorthand, and instead of these 4 properties, I can use simply 1 property. And I can give all of these values to 1 property. So we have transition property, and this is the shorthand. So the first value that goes here is the transition property, which means that we should name the properties that we want to apply transition on. So in our case, you can see that we are only using this transform. Actually, I have a problem here. Well, now we should add transform here, which means that we are using transform. We want to apply transition on our transform. The second property that comes here is the transition duration. So let's add 1 second. The next property that we can write here is the transition timing function. For example, let's make it ease in. And the last value is the transition delay. For example, I can write 1 second. And let's hit save. You can see that it waits 1 second, then it goes. Well, now I don't like to have delay, so I simply can remove it. Now I have only 3 properties here. So maybe I don't like to have ease in, so I can simply write only transform and transformation duration. So these were 2 required properties for a transition to happen. Now if I hover, you can see that I have a nice transform, but only by using this shorthand. Alright, now there is something to keep in mind about transitions, implementing transitions in CSS. The first thing is that transitions always need some events to happen in the page in order to trigger this transition. For example, in our case, you can see that we are binding this transition in this hover effect or hover state. We can, for example, bind this to a click event. So whenever someone clicks something, then we want to trigger this transition. So we can use hover or any kind of event that can happen inside a page. So without this event or without this triggering, we have no other way to implement these transitions. They always need to be triggered. The next thing is that when we want to move our item, for example, now you can see that we are moving this item. One of the common mistakes that people do is to put this trigger event on the element itself. For example, if I were to put this hover effect on this element itself, so then I were to say, for example, that whenever you get hovered, so move yourself 480 pixels to the right. So it doesn't make sense because, for example, if I move my mouse here, so my item goes to the right. So now I no longer have this hover effect active. So the element is not under my mouse right now. So therefore it breaks the animation. So in that time, for example, I should track this item with my mouse to keep the hover state active. Then it should apply its animation. So it's not possible. So sometimes the hover state is active and sometimes it is not, so it breaks your animation. So keep in mind to put your trigger event when especially it's hover. So put it in something that is stable in the page, that doesn't move. So in this case, you can see that this parent element or this black parent element, it doesn't move anywhere. So we can be confident in our animation. Anyway, enough for me talking. So let's now move into animation. But before we move into animation, why do we need to actually learn animation? So this is also an animation. Well, you can see that we are only moving this item. So we can't actually do anything else here. So alright, you might see that we can do here, for example, we can rotate this item to something like 180 degrees. This is fine. You can see that we can do this, but for example, I can't now move my item from here to here. So for example, I want this item to have a circular movement around this container. So I can't do these things. It is just a kind of one-shot animation. So it starts from here, then it goes there, and it's finished. Now for having more complex animation, for having more control on our element, we should use animation property. For example, now it is here. I want it to go here, then go here, then go here in the one single animation. So let's actually move and we will see it better. And now I don't need this hover state anymore. And the next cool thing about animation is that it doesn't need anything to trigger it. So it is a kind of automatic. All right. Now how can we implement animation in this item? How can we implement animation in the CSS? Now for defining our animation, we can simply use keyframes. So we can write keyframes. I will explain it in a second. Then after writing keyframes, we should give a name for our animation. For example, let's say we want to name it slide, for example. Then you should open up these curly braces. Inside these curly braces, we write our animation. This is actually the body of our animation. And these keyframes, it defines our animation, nothing else, for example. So now, how do we write our animation? Let's keep it simple. We have from here, and then we can have to. It is this simple. We can simply say that we want our element to go from this state to this state. It is that simple. So for example, let's just simply change its background color, but we will move it in a second. So let's give it blue. We want it to start from a background color of blue. Then we simply want to turn its background color to yellow. So now we simply say that we want our item to go from this state, which is a background color only, to this state, which is this one. Now we haven't done anything about animation, just we are defining our animation. How do we want to change our item? So these are the changes that we want to apply to our item. Now if we want, instead of using this from and to, we can use simply percentages, and that way we have more control on the flow of our animation. So instead of from, I can simply write 0%. So from and 0% actually mean the same. So we want it to look like this when it's in the 0% of completion, when it just starts. And then instead of these two, I can simply write 100%, which means that I want to have these styles when it's in the 100% of completion. But now we have a bunch of other, we can have as many keyframes as we want. We can use, for example, we can say I want to apply something here when it's in 10% of completion. I want to do these things when it's in the 50% of completion. We can do anything we want. So now we have more control on our elements. So for example, let's actually clear this and we will see it better. Now we have 0% and 100%. Now let's first give this animation to our item and let's see how can we control this animation. Then we will add more keyframes inside this slide animation. Alright, so now how can we control our animation and how can we bind this animation with this test item, for example? There are 7 properties that allow us to control our animation, and it is very, very perfect. I think we have more control, we can do more things in animation that we couldn't do with transition, for example. The first property, once again, I want to list all of the properties, then we will walk through each of them and we will see what they do. So the first property is the animation name. Then we have animation duration. Next we have animation timing function. Next we have animation direction. Next we have animation delay. Next we have animation fill mode. And we have animation iteration count. So we have animation iteration count. And now let's see what are the jobs of each of these properties. Well, animation name, as it's clear from its name, so we can put the name of the animation that we want this item to use. For example, we have only one animation for now, so this is this slide animation. So I can bind this animation with this item by this animation name property. I can now write that I want this item to use the slide animation. Where is this slide animation? Well, it is right here. Next, we have animation duration. So I have explained this duration thing, and the transition is just like that. So I can simply write a duration here. For example, let's say 4 seconds. Next, we have animation timing function. Once again, it is just like transition timing function. I can simply use any of the predefined values, or I can simply use this cubic base here. So let's use linear. Next, we have animation direction. And before we see the animation direction, the animation name and animation duration, these two properties are required properties. Next, these 4-5 properties, these are optional. We can give them or we can not to specify them. Well, now if I save, we should see the animation. And actually, let's, instead of just changing this background colors, let's move our item to see these other properties better. So now if I save, you can see that it changed its background color from blue to yellow. But we don't want to change only background color. We are using animation. It is used for creating complex animations. So in the 0%, I want to transform it, translate X 0, which means that I don't want to move it anywhere. I just want it to be right here where it is right now. Next, in the 100%, let's say I want to move it from here to right here. So let's use the transform, translate X, and 480 pixels. Let's hit save. So you can see that without hovering anything, without clicking anything, so it starts the animation automatically, and this is a benefit of using animations. Well, so you can see that whenever I save, it moves my item to the right, this amount of space. Now let's see the animation direction. So the default value is normal, which means that it normally goes where it is supposed to go. So we say here we wanted to move 480 pixels to the right because we are giving it a positive value, so it moves to the right. It's supposed to move to the right. Now if I hit save, so it does the same thing. Now I can simply reverse it. For example, if I want, if I hit save now, and instead of starting from here, it will start from the destination, which is here, and then it will come to its initial place. You can see that it starts from reverse. So the next property is animation iteration count. We are not done with this animation direction, but we should first learn this animation iteration count, then we will see other values that we can pass here. So for example, in animation iteration count, I can specify how many times do I want my animation to run. By default, it runs 1 time. So if I want, I can, for example, give it 4 times, 3 times, 2 times, or I can write infinite, which means that it will run forever. So let's simply make it 4 times for now, and let's actually keep it normal for now. So now if I hit save, you can see that it starts from here and goes to here. Now it immediately jumps from here back to where it was, so it starts our animation again. So you can see that it kind of jumps back to where it was before. It is the normal and reverse. You can see that it does the same thing in reverse too. You can see that when it reaches here, it jumps back to here. Now, if we don't want this behavior, if we want it to be kind of smoothly coming back and going forward, so I can use alternate here. Now, if I hit save, you can see that it starts from here, now goes to here. Now instead of jumping back to where it was before, it comes smoothly with animation. So this is alternate. You can see that it makes it very nice. Then we have alternate reverse, which it does the same thing, but just it starts from the opposite side. So it starts from here. All right. So we talked about animation iteration count too. So if I keep it infinite, and let's make it 1 second so that it runs faster, it will run forever. It will never stop. So this is the infinite value for animation iteration count. So let's bring it back to 4, or actually to 1, 2, and let's make it 4 seconds again. Let's hit save, so it will run 2 times. Now we have animation delay. It is also just like transition delay. So if I want to have some delay, I can write here, for example, 1 second. So it will now wait 1 second, and then it starts from this side because we have said here alternate reverse. So let's remove this reverse. All right. The next property is animation fail mode. And by using this property, we can decide whether we want to keep these styles for our item after animation is over, or we want it to come back and get its initial styles. So right now we don't have any particular visual style here. So for example, let's change its background color. In the very beginning, we want it to be blue, and when it's over, when it is completed, I want to have a background color of, say, yellow. So this is just an example. So by using this animation fill mode, now I can specify whether I want to keep any of these 2 styles for my item after animation is done, after animation is completed. So for example, it moves from here to here. Now what? Should it keep any of these styles, or it should turn back and get these styles? Now, for example, if I want my element to keep its final state styles from its animation, I can use forward here. It will make sense more if you see actually. So if I write forward, now I say that I want you to start from a background color of blue. Then when you are in your 100% of completion, so you definitely will have a yellow background color. But now, after this animation is over, I want you to still have this background color and this overall, these styles. So let's hit save. You can see that it has a delay, but now it goes to the right. And now when animation is over, but I think for seeing it, we should keep this animation direction normal and this iteration count to 1. All right, now let's hit save. You can see that it starts with blue background color. Now when our animation is over, now our animation is finished actually, but you can see that it keeps these styles, which are our final keyframes styles. So now it keeps these final states styles after the animation. Well, now what if we wanted to go back to this red background color, for example? So I can simply write backward here, which means that it will start from a blue background color, then it will turn it to yellow until the 100% of completion. But when the animation is done, it will get a red background color again because it is its initial background color. So it goes from blue to yellow. Now it comes back, and not only it gets its background color, but it will get its initial state, overall initial styles, which is its position as well. Now there is another value that we can put here, which is both. Now what does this both mean? That it means that it will ignore this background color or these styles overall. It will only keep these 2 styles. Before the animation, it will have these styles, and after the animation, it will keep these styles. Now let's hit save. You can see that it is blue. Now it goes to the right, and it will stay in these styles. Alright, so now we walk through all of these animation properties. Now let's play with our keyframes, because we don't want to only have this simple animation. We could have had this animation with transition too. So now let's make our circular movement. So I want this animation to be so starting from here, and our item should go here, then it go here, then it should go here, and finally it should come back to its initial state. So it will have a kind of circular movement around this container. Alright, so now we defined our 0%, which means that when you're in your 0% of completion, you should be this thing. And let's remove this background color, or we can keep it no matter. For example, I want to define another keyframe here when our animation is in 25% of completion. So when it's in 25%, so it should be, let me use a transform. So I want to move my item. So remember, it starts from here, so I wanted to come here in 25%. So what I need to do is actually just copy this transform, and let's replace it with this. Alright, I wanted to go for 480 pixels to the right when it's in 25% of completion. So we need to have another keyframe too. Remember, we need at least 4 keyframes, I think. So this is one movement, here is another, here is third, here is fourth. So we need at least 4 keyframes. So I can define my 50%. So I want to do something when it's in 50%. So once again, let's paste transform. And this time I want to bring it to the bottom, while it will be right here from the x-axis. So I need to only change its y-axis. So I need to use translate y 350 pixels, something like this. So in 50%, I wanted to move to the bottom. Next, I need to define my another keyframe, which is in 75%. So when it's in the 75% of completion, I wanted to move. Now we are right here. I wanted to keep its y translate, and just I want to remove its x translate. So I want it to be translate of 0%, translate x of 0%, and translate y of 350 pixels. Alright, now in the last, you can see that I'm defining that when you're in 100%, you should translate it 480 pixels, which is wrong because it will move it back to the right. I don't want that, so I want it to be 0 pixels. And in the same time, I want to translate y. Same time, I want to translate y this to 0 too. So in this case, when our animation is over, our item will be back to its initial position. And let's translate y this to 0 too, which means that I want to start from its initial state. So now let's hit save and see what will happen. Oops, not this. So let's hit save. You can see that we have our delay. Perfect. You can see that we have 4 movements in one single animation. And let's actually make it 5 seconds. And let's this time make it infinite. Hit save. It has a delay. So you can see that now we have more control on our element. We can define as many keyframes as we want. So we have very flexibility. We can do anything. So for example, let's actually rotate this item when it's animating. So when it's moving, I can simply write rotate, and 0% I want it to be rotate of 0. Then I want it to be rotate of, for example, something like 100 degrees. I don't know how will it look like. And in here I want to rotate it minus 100 degrees. And here I want to rotate it 50 degrees. And in the last I want to rotate it back to 0, so it will be clear. So now let's hit save. You can see that how it works fine. I should write maybe minus here. So alright, so now let's see. So you can see that we can do everything with our item. We can play with our item, we can create complex animations, and you can play with this. Now you know everything. Here's our keyframes. We do everything that we want to change to our element right here inside our keyframes. And these percentages are just some key moments in our animation. So here is our 25% of completion. Here is our, for example, 50% of completion. Here is our 75% of completion, and here is our 100% of completion. So you can play with this. Definitely it is not something very hard. It is pretty simple. Now you can see that we are using these 7 properties to control our animation. What we can do is actually to use a shorthand here. For example, let's keep them here just to have a reference, and I'm going to use the animation shorthand, then we will delete it. So we have animation, just animation. This is shorthand. Now we can give all of these 7 properties as values inside this animation property. So as I said before, only these 2 properties are required for having an animation. The rest of these 5 properties are optional. So now let's add our animation name. The first thing that goes inside here is the animation name. The next thing that we can add here is animation duration. The next thing we can add animation timing function. Now we can have our animation direction. After that we can have our infinite animation iteration count. Then we can have our delay. So 1 second, we have 1 second of delay. Then we can have our animation fill mode. So in this case we have both. So if I delete this code, I should still, if I save, I should still have the same animation. Alright, perfect. You can see that now instead of having 7 properties, we are only using 1 single property. And actually, you know what? We can delete some of these things because right now we know that this both doesn't mean anything because our animation is running infinitely. Then our delay also doesn't mean anything because we never stop our animation. Now you can see that we have our animation. Actually, we don't need this normal too because it is by default normal, and we even don't need this linear, or we can keep it. So now let's hit save. You can see that now we still have our animation, but this time we are only using 4 properties. Alright, so I think we have covered everything about transitions and animation and overall animations in CSS. Now let's apply everything that we learned so far to another project, which you saw it in the intro. So it is a little bit more realistic than this. So I want to delete all of these test related codes. Delete. And I'm going to delete this from here too. Let's hit save. Alright, let's hit save here. Now let's uncomment this commented code. So alright, now let's hit save. So you can see that now we have a static page here. It is a kind of more realistic than the previous example. So As you saw in the intro, this page had very nice animations. So these buttons, for example, they had very cool animation, very smooth animation when we hovered these things. And also you saw that this information, these items, they were coming smoothly from both sides with a nice animation. And also when we hovered these things, they slided to the right, each one. And also we saw that this image, this Habib's image, it was a kind of having an infinite animation, which was zooming in and zooming out. So now let's apply all of these things to our project. So as you see here, first of all, let's start by animating these buttons. So you can see we have an option class, and then these are just simple divs. So we can select them by selecting the option div. So we have options, then I want to select every divs that are inside these options. Now you know that we can achieve that cool animation with using transitions. So I can add transition. Let's give it to transform, and let's give it 0.5 seconds, which is half a second. Then let's actually set the hover event. I want to transform it, translate Y, simply something like 10 pixels, I think is fine. Now let's hover. Cool, you can see that now with 2 lines of code we have now a nice animation on our buttons, and it looks really realistic. All right, so it was the first animation that I wanted to do to our page. Now let's animate these items. I want these items to come from both sides inside the page when our page gets reloaded or when we refresh our page. All right, and now you know that we can do this thing with transition, because in transitions we should have a kind of event to happen to trigger this animation. But when we don't have anything to trigger, we should use animations. So in this case, we don't want to hover anything. We don't want to click anything. We want this animation to be a kind of automatic. So let's use animation. And by using animation, you know that we should specify our keyframes. So now let's add our keyframes. I want to add a keyframe. Let's name it move right. You can name it anything. So I wanted to, this time let's just simply write from and to, because we didn't use this before. And this is my 2. I wanted to go from transform translate x minus 100%, which means that I want it to be outside of the page in the first place. So I wanted to start from this state, which is completely outside of the page. Then I want to specify my 2, the same thing, but I want it to be right here. So translate x 0. So let me explain this. It actually first locates my item outside of the page, which is minus 100%. I want it to be first in this state, in this style. Then I want it to come in this state, which is translate x of 0, which means that right here, that they're right now. This is for move right. You know that we need another same thing, name to move left. So let's rename this move left. And the only difference is that it should take our items to this side first, and then it also should bring our item back to their initial place. All right, so now we have our 2 keyframes. Now let's bind these 2 keyframes on our items. So as you can see in the HTML, you can see that we have a UL tag. Then these items are just LI elements. So I can simply select UL LI. And now, as you saw in the intro, this animation, our items, they came from both sides. Now how can we divide these items? We can simply, as you know, CSS selectors, we can use pseudo classes and the nth child, and by using this I can access, or I can divide my list items to even and odds. So this selection will select only the even li elements, which is this first one, this one, this second one, this fourth one, for example. These are even. And then we have the same thing but for odd elements. So I can simply write the li's. I want to select the nth child of them. This time I want to select the odd li elements. So this is, for example, first, third, and fifth. These are odd elements. Alright, so now let's add this animation to each of them. I can simply write animation. Let's give them, we are using shorthand by the way. So let's give it move right. And let's give it 0.5 seconds. And let's keep it linear. Alright, now let's add the next animation to these items. Move left 0.5 seconds and linear, for example, and let's hit save. I probably need to make it a little slower. Alright, now you can see that it looks perfect. If we refresh our page, it will automatically perform this animation. You can see. Now we have two animations in two items. Now the last thing is to add this sliding animation to our items. So these are these items. I can simply, because I don't want to differentiate the odd and even li elements in this animation, I want to simply select all of the li elements, and I want to give the transition. Once again, we are using transition and performing into transform property, and 0.5 seconds ease. Alright, now let's add a hover effect or hover state, and let's transform it, translate translate x. We don't want it to move vertically, so let's move it 10 pixels. Alright, now let's save. First it comes with nice animation. Now when we hover, you can see that it's looking perfect, I think. Well, now the last thing is this Habib's image. Let's animate this, and I want to animate this because I want to practice the infinite animation for you once again. So let's add our keyframes. I want to just name it hit, for example, hit move or hit, no matter. So we want to have a from, or you can simply write 0%. I personally like to use percentages. And this 0%, I want it to be transform scale 110%, which is 110%. Then 50%, I want to have transform scale of 120%, which is getting bigger. Then in 100%, which is the last keyframe, I want to transform it back to what it was before, so which means 110%. All right, now let's add this animation to our head. So not our head, but Habib's head. Now let's select our image. You can see in the HTML that we have an image class, then we have image inside that. So I can select image and img. Let's give it simply animation hit. Let's give it something like 6 seconds or 5 seconds. and I want it to be ease and infinite, and that's it. So now let's save. Alright, now you can see that it works. It will be moving forever, and let's make it a little faster. Alright, you can see that now we have nice animations on this static page. So now we have this animation on our button hover effect, we have this animation and our items hover effect, these information things, and then we have an infinite loop or infinite animation in this image, and we have a kind of cool animation when our page gets reloaded, and these items come with nice animation smoothly. Alright guys, this was all about animations in CSS. I really hope you enjoyed this video and you learned something new today. If you did, don't forget to give a thumbs up for this video, and for watching more, please subscribe to this channel. Thank you for watching and have a nice time.